Let me tell you something counterintuitive. The biggest breakdown of my life didn't come from a failed company, a crash in the markets, or a mission abort. It came from something far more human, a divorce. Now, here's why you should keep listening. Because in this experience, as painful, irrational, and messy as it was, I found the tools to become something more efficient, more focused, and more indestructible than ever before. You think you know pain? Try running billion-dollar decisions on 3 hours of sleep, while your personal life burns like a forest fire in the background. Try pushing innovation forward while dragging emotional wreckage behind you. It was like trying to launch a rocket with a hole in the fuel tank. And yet this isn't a sob story. This is a breakdown manual. This is how you re-engineer yourself when the thing you depended on emotionally is ripped out like a circuit board mid-flight. Let me be transparent. Divorce is brutal, not just because of the relationship ending, but because of what it reveals the parts of you that were weak, distracted, naive. You're exposed. Financially, emotionally, psychologically, and if you're not careful, it's the kind of storm that can delete your drive. But here's the strange twist: if you approach it like an engineer, you find a way through. You don't escape the pain, you study it. You don't numb it, you map it. You don't break, you adapt. That's what this speech is about. How I went from almost breaking under the emotional load to building something bulletproof, not just in business, but in my inner world. If you've been through heartbreak, if you've felt like you lost control of your own life, or if you're still walking around with emotional debris, this is for you, because the most important product you will ever build is you. And sometimes, life strips you down to the motherboard, so you can rebuild without the bugs. Let's begin. It's strange. You can be performing at the highest level of your life, pushing boundaries in science, technology, and human potential, and yet privately, you're disintegrating. That's what happened to me. From the outside, everything looked legendary: product launches, funding rounds, media buzz, progress. But behind the scenes, my personal life was a war zone. And the worst part, there was no off switch, no pause a button for success while you handle your emotions. The world doesn't wait for your healing. I remember being in meetings where billion-dollar conversations were happening, and all I could think about was the silence in my house. The silence of someone no longer there, the absence of a presence, the constant noise in your mind asking, "How did it get this bad?" Divorce doesn't announce itself politely. It sneaks in through the cracks in the relationship and detonates everything quietly until one day, it's just rubble. You're still dressed in your armor, trying to lead people, trying to invent, trying to stay logical while inside, you're bleeding invisibly. This is the part no one talks about. People assume intelligence protects you, that success makes you immune to personal pain. But the truth, emotional trauma doesn't care how smart you are. You can understand orbital mechanics, but you can't calculate the gravitational pull of heartbreak. You can solve structural stress problems in metal, but not the emotional stress of separation. At that time, I started noticing what I now call functional collapse. You're technically operating, you show up, you talk, you deliver. But your internal system is compromised. No creativity, no spark, no clear mental thread. You're just running on brute willpower, and even that's a finite resource. I kept thinking, is this what breaking down feels like? Not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet erosion of stability, a subtle corrosion of motivation. What shocked me the most wasn't the pain I expected pain. What shocked me was how it infected my logic. Decisions became slower. Risks felt heavier. My mind wasn't agile. It was like I'd been coded for heists, beat execution, and suddenly I was running outdated firmware. And here's the dangerous part. When you're in the middle of building something important, something that could change humanity's trajectory, you can't afford that drag, so you lie to yourself. You say, "I'm fine." You say, "I'll handle this later." But later never comes because you're too busy holding the pieces of your identity together with duct tape. This moment, that collapse in the middle of brilliance, it taught me something I'll never forget, that emotional resilience isn't optional. It's infrastructure. You need it as much as you need capital, as much as you need innovation. Without it, your entire empire is built on shaky code. I didn't want to accept it at first. I wanted to keep pretending I was a machine. But I wasn't, and that acknowledgement, brutal as it was the first step in regaining control. So yes, divorce almost broke me, but not because I lost someone, because I almost lost myself at the exact moment the world needed my full capacity. And if you've ever felt like your personal life is a threat to your potential, understand this. The pain isn't your enemy, but ignoring it is. This breakdown, it was the bug in the system I never knew was there. And I had to crash before I could update. For most of my life, I believed logic would always win, that if you were smart enough, rational enough, you could think pain, that you could architect your way around heartbreak the same way you design around structural failure in a rocket. But divorce taught me a different equation, emotion logic in the short term. It was humbling to say the least. You see, I tried to approach the separation like a problem to be solved. What went wrong? Where was the misalignment? What are the most efficient exit paths? What's the damage control strategy? But it didn't work. Because divorce isn't a code bug. It's not a faulty part you can just replace. It's a full system emotional overload. Even when you know the decision is right, even when there's no turning back, there's still a raw human cost. And your brain, the same brain that can model electric vehicles or space trajectories, suddenly becomes unreliable. I found myself reacting instead of thinking. I wasn't optimizing, I was emotional, and I hated that. Not because emotion is bad, but because it felt like loss of control. It wasn't rage or sorrow all the time. Sometimes it was subtle. Procrastination, distraction, mood swings, sleepless nights, irrational decisions masked as gut feeling. And this is where people get trapped. When you rely only on intelligence to navigate pain, you miss something critical. You have to process it. You can't outrun it. You can't bury it under work or logic or silence. That's like trying to patch a leak in the hull by ignoring the water rising inside. So I did what engineers do. I started to map my emotional patterns. I studied the triggers. I tracked the spirals. And slowly, I realized something powerful. Emotion is data. It just doesn't speak your usual language. Anger isn't always destruction. It's often a boundary being crossed. Sadness isn't weakness. It's often a signal that something meaningful is shifting. Loneliness isn't failure. It's a call to reconnect, not necessarily with others, but with yourself. Once I started treating emotion not as an enemy, but as input, I stopped being afraid of it. I created rules for myself, emotional protocols, if you will, moments of silence each day, strict boundaries on communication, sleep minimums, no major decisions during emotional spikes, and most importantly, letting myself feel the weight fully without trying to suppress it. You can't fix what you won't face, and emotional pain is like gravity. Ignore it, and it will still pull you down. But once you learn to work with it, to redirect it, to use it as fuel instead of friction, that's where the real shift happens. The mistake most high performers make, they try to perform their emotions instead of integrating them into the system. They treat emotional healing as weakness when it's actually optimization. What I learned is simple but brutal. You can't build something great if your internal foundation is crumbling, and the foundation isn't logic. It's emotional integrity. Divorce cracked my foundation. But in doing so, it gave me a chance to rebuild with truth, unfiltered, uncomfortable, unbreakable. So if you're stuck between reason and feeling, let emotion have the mic. Let it speak. Let it burn. Let it say what logic won't. Then design your life with both, because greatness isn't just built from intelligence. It's built from pain turned into process. Most people think divorce is about emotions. It is, no doubt, but once the emotional wave passes, what you're left with is a landscape of decisions, documents, and damage control. It becomes business, and like any business, if you don't treat it strategically, it will bankrupt you. Emotionally, financially, energetically, I realized this quickly. If I kept viewing the divorce as a tragedy, it would consume me, so I flipped the lens. I started treating it like a company going through a hostile split. Sounds cold, maybe, but when your future, your legacy, and your mind are at stake, you don't survive by being sentimental. You survive by being surgical. Divorce involves assets, contracts, time, people, reputation. It's a high-stakes negotiation, and often the terms aren't fair. You don't get to walk away clean. You walk away reorganized if you're lucky. So I created a plan, not just for the legal separation, but for the post-divorce architecture. That included emotional asset management. What beliefs, habits, and patterns was I carrying forward that no longer served me? Mental energy budgeting. How much bandwidth was I willing to waste on resentment or regret? Strategic exits. What did I need to disconnect from to protect what still mattered? I approached it like I would handle a struggling company division. Audit everything, cut emotional overhead, keep what works, scrap what doesn't. Yes, it was brutal, but it was necessary. The real complexity, not in the logistics but in the unspoken costs. You lose shared spaces, shared dreams, shared language. Even time becomes fragmented. Holidays, routines, memories. You can't quantify that on paper, but you feel it in the silence between every decision. And there's a strange moment, a tipping point, where the goal is no longer to win the divorce. It's to salvage your future from the wreckage. I had to ask hard questions. What version of myself do I want to be after this? What needs to end so something better can begin? How do I design the next chapter intentionally, not as a reaction, but as a reinvention? That's when the negotiation turned inward. It wasn't about what I got to keep. It was about what I was willing to let go of for the sake of evolution. The truth: divorce exposes your vulnerabilities with surgical precision. It reveals what you've been avoiding in yourself. And once it's done, you don't just get your freedom, you get responsibility. Because there's no one left to blame, no one left to carry your baggage. It's your life, your call, your code to rewrite. I didn't walk away from that process victorious. I walked away stripped but sharp. I reevaluated everything: my leadership style, my decision making, my relationships, my time allocation. Divorce forced me to optimize not just how I loved, but how I lived. If you're facing that same separation, know this: it's not just a breakup. It's a transition from version 1.0 of your emotional life to something entirely new, more focused, more filtered, more powerful. Handle it like a mission, critical operation, because it is, and when it's done, don't rebuild what broke you. Rebuild what makes you unbreakable. People glamorize solitude. They romanticize it. quote it, but let me tell you, real silence after divorce doesn't feel poetic. It doesn't feel wise. It feels like space, and space, in its rawest form, is empty. Not peaceful, just absent, no sound, no energy bouncing back, no reflection of love, frustration, or conversation, just vacuum. After the separation, the first thing I noticed wasn't freedom, it was the absence of noise. No text messages, no voices in the kitchen, no shared laughter, just a heavy, dull stillness like walking through an abandoned control room. And here's the thing, I'd been through failure before, in startups, in product development, even in public, but this was different. This wasn't the sound of something going wrong. This was the sound of something no longer existing, and in that kind of silence, you either fall apart or you begin to listen. Deeply, I didn't like what I heard at first, because silence doesn't lie. It reflects you back to yourself, stripped of noise, distraction, identity, no applause, no criticism, just the raw signal of who you really are when nobody's watching. That's where the work began. I used to think reinvention came from action, from doing more, building more, moving faster, but what I learned in that silence is this. Sometimes reinvention begins with subtraction. Take away the noise and the truth surfaces. Take away the comfort and clarity emerges. Take away the distractions and your mind has no choice but to confront itself. So I stopped running. I let the silence in. I let it wrap around me like the void of space, and I started asking questions most people avoid. Who am I if I'm not needed by anyone else? What's left of me when no one is watching? What parts of me were designed to perform instead of live? That's when I found a strange kind of power. In silence, your thoughts echo louder, your fears get clearer, and your mission becomes more precise. I realized how much of my drive had been entangled with proving things to others, to a partner, to myself. And now, with no one to perform for, I had to redefine the why behind everything. It wasn't about being seen. It was about building because I believed, not because I needed to be validated. That shift changed everything. The silence that once felt unbearable became a launchpad. It gave me time to recalibrate, not just emotionally but strategically, to question habits, priorities, even the architecture of my time. You'd be surprised how much energy you reclaim when you're not emotionally entangled. The system becomes more efficient, not colder, just more intentional. And yes, I rebuilt relationships, but I never rushed. Because I wasn't looking for noise anymore. I was looking for resonance. That's what silence taught me, that not all voids are to be filled. Some are meant to be understood, so you never build from weakness again. So if you're in that silence right now, and it feels like failure, it's not. It's just the space before your next evolution. Let it echo, let it strip you down, because in the silence you don't hear the world. You hear yourself, and if you listen long enough, that voice becomes clear, focused, and ready to build something no pain can ever touch. When everything around you is falling apart, you search for control, something solid to grab, before you get pulled into the undertow. For me, that control came through one thing: work. People often assume I'm driven by ambition, that I work 18-hour days because I'm chasing some external finish line. But during and after the divorce, it wasn't about ambition. It was about survival. When your emotional system is in free fall, structure becomes the rope you hold onto, and work, no matter how chaotic, had rules. It was predictable. It responded to input. Unlike relationships, business had logic. And logic, in those days, felt like safety. I poured everything into it, not because I was inspired, but because I was escaping. Design reviews, technical problems, strategy meetings, launch simulations, they all became part of a self-made recovery algorithm. They gave me something I couldn't find in my personal life: progress. Work doesn't ghost you. Work doesn't emotionally withdraw. It doesn't rewrite the past or take half of what you built. It just responds. With every action, there's a reaction. With every risk, a result. In a world that suddenly felt irrational, work became my source of clarity. But here's where it gets complex. While the world praised the productivity, they had no idea where it was coming from. Behind every milestone I hit, there was grief I hadn't processed. Behind every sleepless night coding or managing teams, there was silence I was trying to outrun. Work wasn't just a tool, it became a refuge. And that's dangerous not because it doesn't work, but because it works too well. You can get so good at masking pain with progress that you convince yourself you've healed. But in truth, you've just redirected the energy. You've rewired the pain to power a different system. Still, I don't regret it, because something unexpected happened. What began as escape evolved into rebirth. You see, pain has momentum. And if you point that momentum at something that matters, something bigger than your personal story, it transforms. That's what I did. Instead of letting grief consume me, I let it fuel my vision, not to prove anyone wrong, not to impress anyone, but to remind myself that even shattered systems can be rebuilt stronger, smarter, more efficient. I treated work like a neural training ground. Every problem I solved, every system I optimized, it was retraining my mind to operate again, not as a man broken by loss, but as someone being rebuilt through obsession. Eventually, the work stopped being a distraction. It became purposeful again, not just output for the sake of avoiding pain, but contribution for the sake of alignment. Because that's the secret people miss. Work can save you, if you use it correctly, not as a way to hide, but as a way to reforge who you are under pressure. I still carry the scars, but I also carry the upgrades. That season of relentless work taught me more than any degree, any deal, any investor. It taught me how to rewire my emotional energy into creation. It taught me that resilience isn't built in rest, it's built in resistance. So if you're in pain and all you can do is work, start there. But don't just grind mindlessly. Aim the pain, point it at something meaningful, because when your heart is in pieces, the only thing more powerful than putting it back together is building something new with the fragments. Collapse isn't always the end. Sometimes it's just a forced system shut down, a reset triggered by internal instability. Pain, failure, heartbreak, these aren't final events. They're alerts. They tell you that your current architecture can no longer support your future. And once the crash is complete, you have two choices. You can rebuild the same faulty system, or you can upgrade. I chose the upgrade. Divorce didn't just break my heart, it exposed my inefficiencies in how I handled conflict, in what I tolerated, in what I gave my energy to, in the blind spots I ignored in both life and business. For a while, I thought healing was about returning to normal. It's not. Healing is about refusing to go back to anything that caused the crash in the first place. So I sat down metaphorically and literally and began to rewrite my internal code. Just like I would debug a piece of software, I started asking hard questions. What outdated beliefs was I running on? What emotional dependencies had corrupted my decision making? Where had I optimized for comfort instead of truth? It was brutally honest work, but it was also liberating because I realized the version of myself before the divorce was functional, yes, but not optimized. He was hyper-forming, sure, but still carrying invisible inefficiencies, emotional drag, unspoken resentment, unconscious compromises. The divorce burned all that away. It left nothing but the core operating system. And from there, I began to rebuild stronger boundaries, clearer values, sharper focus, and a mindset that no longer avoided pain but integrated it. I began making decisions differently, not just in relationships, but in business, leadership, and lifestyle. I stopped chasing approval. I stopped tolerating ambiguity. I stopped lying to myself in the name of keeping peace. Instead, I started aligning everything: goals, people, time around clarity. It wasn't about becoming colder. It was about becoming clearer. The result, a version of myself that wasn't just emotionally stable, but strategically ruthless about protecting peace, focus, and purpose. Because here's what they don't tell you: the real power doesn't come from healing the past. It comes from extracting the truth from it and applying that truth with precision. The emotional collapse forced me to get honest, not just about what went wrong in the marriage, but about what I allowed, what I ignored, what I gave energy to that never gave anything back. And once I faced all that, I became unshakable. I didn't need someone else to complete the system. I was the system, newly engineered, fully responsible, and running clean code. So no, divorce didn't destroy me, it bugged me, and that's the message I want to leave you with. Don't rebuild your life just to survive. Rebuild it to dominate, to live with precision, to think with clarity, to love eventually from a place of strength, not need. The collapse was the best thing that ever happened to me, because now I don't live in fear of pain. I use it. I don't avoid pressure. I convert it. And I don't need peace to feel powerful, because now power is my peace. So if your life has crashed, good, now you're finally ready to build something real. From zero, with intention, with fire. And this time it won't just work. It will be unbreakable.